Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook video. Today, Saturday, March 29th, 2025, last weekly update of March. Before you know it, 2 days away now till the month of April. So we're now through one more month of the off season, and now that we're getting to the month of April, and excuse the loud noise outside if you hear it. Um, we now only have, beyond this, next week will be in the month of April, and we will only have not 2 days, but 2 months till the start of hurricane season. In fact, let's start off this week. I finally remembered, and we'll do this every single week till hurricane season begins. The countdown of the days till June 1st, which is the first day of hurricane season in the Atlantic. We are now 64 days away. The 60-day mark, meaning exactly 60 days, 2 months away from the season, is next week. And obviously, once again, next week is the start of April. So we're fast approaching hurricane season, meaning that everything that's going on right now, at least in terms of factors and what to watch in terms of ENSO and sea surface temperatures, it'll all really begin to matter now because we're starting to get towards crunch time till hurricane season starts. In fact, since we're talking about sea surface temperature anomalies, let's start off with that, as we do every single week, with the NOAA Coral Reef Watch sea surface temperature anomalies map. This is updated as of yesterday. It's always a day behind, but it really doesn't matter because what difference really does a day make anyways? It's not really that much changes. But in general, here's the sea surface temperature anomaly map. And what do we have? Well, we have warm Atlantic. That's kind of the first things that stand out. Especially warm through the Caribbean and especially the Gulf of Mexico. And especially if you were to compare this to last week, you notice last week we had a lot of these cooler anomalies, especially in the northern and eastern portions of the Gulf. And it seems like we've recovered since then. But generally, with the Caribbean and Gulf being warm, that's once again kind of been a trend that we've seen persist throughout the winter and spring. Well, the spring so far. And especially if this persists through the rest of the spring, and as we get towards June, this will definitely be something very interesting to watch, especially since in the early season, where do we look for in terms of where most of our activity would form? It tends to be in the Caribbean and Gulf because early on in the season, we don't typically watch towards Africa and the Eastern Atlantic anyways. Conditions are usually still too hostile for development to occur, which is why, as you can see, we kind of have some of these cooler anomalies out east off the western coast of Africa, but I'm not too concerned about this. One, because as I said, I think I mentioned this last week, but the Atlantic tends to warm up anyways. I mean, that's how it's been over the last several years, especially as we get towards July and August and the weeks leading up to the peak of the hurricane season. The Atlantic tends to warm up a lot. Even in May, there tends to be a several week time period where the trades really slow down and we see substantial warming of the Eastern Atlantic. But either way, in the early season, we typically don't look out here. We look much closer to home. And especially if these warmer anomalies persist, that means a lot when it comes to tracking development where we would typically see it, and that is closer to us here in the U.S. So it's very important to watch that we have a bunch of these warmer sea surface temperature anomalies. And obviously, warmer sea surface temperatures is a major plus when it comes to looking at signs for an active hurricane season. So we have that. And then meanwhile, in the Pacific, we have these colder anomalies still along the equatorial Pacific, especially as we head towards the central and western part of the Pacific Basin. Still some of these warmer anomalies that remain in the eastern Pacific, but especially if you were to compare this to earlier this month, we've seen quite a dramatic cooling or leveling off of the warmth in the Pacific. And I could even show you that with the sea surface temperature anomalies from the NOAA Coral Reef Watch specific to the Nino 3.4 region, which I really should bring up the Nino region graphic to show you, the specific regions we watch in the Pacific, especially when we're talking about things like El Nino and La Nina. But really quickly, I'll highlight generally where the Nino 3.4 is, and it's somewhere right in here. It's kind of in between the Central Pacific and the Eastern Pacific, and that's specifically where we look at for La Nina. And notice where you look towards earlier this month, we really saw quite a dramatic warming of the Nino 3.4 region and generally the Pacific as a whole. And we saw that up until mid-month, and then since then we've pretty much been in a huge crash downward. We saw very strong and very persistent westerly winds, and weaker trade winds in the Eastern Pacific earlier in the month, but since then those have gone away, and as a result, sea surface temperature anomalies crashed quite a bit in the Nino 3.4. I mean, before then, roughly towards mid-March, look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. You remember this was getting towards already positive zero point 0.5, which is actually the threshold for El Nino. So already in mid-March, we were pushing close to very warm neutral, maybe even borderline El Nino. But now we're March 28th. The latest value is back in the negative cool neutral territory. And that is very significant, especially since, as I mentioned, we are within the last few days of March headed towards April. And pretty much any development that we have now in the ENSO region really, really matters as to how it implicates for hurricane season. And obviously, if things stay on the cooler side and we don't head towards this especially strong El Nino, which clearly, if you were to look at this graph and see how much of a big crash we've had over the last several weeks, you would imagine we are definitely not in a rush towards El Nino. And that definitely matters because that would be a plus for hurricane season. But we'll see. Still a lot up in the air. And then meanwhile, let's really quickly take a look at the MDR in the Atlantic, and generally things remaining on the warmer side there. We have, again, some of these cooler anomalies in the far eastern Atlantic, but if you were to average the whole entire MDR, including the Caribbean, things are generally above normal. We've seen things slightly cool off steadily, especially from the beginning of the year. But I mean, the warmth that we had at the beginning of the year, kind of lingering from last year, that kind of warmth that we had, really is not something that you sustain for such a long period of time, because the level of warmth that we were in the Atlantic last year, I think it even started from 2023, was just incredible. Even though it really didn't lead to an incredible hurricane season, although it was still very active, like everybody thought it would be an incredible season, but it still ended up being a very active season. But the warmth was such incredible, lasted for such a long period of time, it was only a matter of time before things were going to begin to cool off. But the latest value in terms of the MDR, at least if you were to average it all out, 0.2 degrees Celsius above normal. That's still decent. There's still warmth in the Atlantic. It's not like this is all cold, so that's not a huge overwhelming negative. So you would generally put a positive here, and judging by the latest Nino 3.4 value, somewhat of a negative here. And if you were to kind of combine those two together, you would assume, okay, maybe that's not such a bad signal in terms of it being very suppressive for this hurricane season. So that's just generally what you would think of when if you were to combine those two factors so far. But obviously, we still have a few months left to go till hurricane season starts. But it is fast approaching. We're already almost approaching April, and trust me, the next few weeks will fly by very quickly. The SOI too is something that I also like to look at. I mean, you were to know that if you watch every single week, and if you don't, and if this is your first video, but you do want to watch these videos every single week, would very much recommend that you subscribe. Just kind of have to throw that in, but really important that you would subscribe, and I highly encourage it. But with the SOI, especially this too, you could even see with the SOI, and I look at the SOI because it's a very good measurement of how the atmosphere is responding. And just to give you a general rule of thumb, if the SOI is in the positive range, that generally correlates more with the La Nina atmospheric type pattern, while if the SOI was in the negative range, it correlates more with El Nino. And you could even see with the SOI from late February up until around mid-month March, we saw quite a dip with the SOI. We even got as low as an average of just under 1 point in the 30-day, although the 90-day average has kind of remained steady. But since around mid-March-ish, the SOI has trended up steadily. Now we're back to a 7-point 30-day average. And usually another rule of thumb to think of is generally when we're right at 7 points positive, that specifically correlates that the atmosphere is especially responding more like a La Nina. Below that, we are somewhat La Nina like, maybe neutral. But especially at +7 is when we really start to respond like a La Nina. And the opposite is true for negative, corresponding more with an El Nino. But very interesting. The SOI, especially since mid-month, has trended back up. The atmosphere definitely responding a little bit more as of late like a La Nina. And you can even see this as well with the zonal wind anomalies. And this is also another graph that I like to look at. You could see earlier in the month, especially were to look towards early March, you had a lot of these oranges and yellows that were present, especially if you were to look down here, that correlates more towards the Eastern Pacific. But we've seen those go away quite a bit, and especially right now, which is where the black line is, that's where we are today. You notice we have more of these kind of bluish greens, and those represent generally stronger trades. So we're not seeing a bunch of these yellows and oranges, which represent weaker trades, and more westerly winds, which would lead to warming in the Pacific, and obviously would help us within El Nino. And if we're going out into the future, you do see some of these yellows making a comeback. So maybe we don't have especially strong trades in the Pacific, but at least looking out to, this is pretty much going towards the next month. I think this is a 30-day-ish forecast, maybe a 40-day forecast. I don't know. But this goes out at least towards the next several weeks. So this takes us out into pretty much the month of April. And you were to look in the Pacific, you don't have these strong, easterlies here. So I guess we're not really in a La Nina, but you also don't have any of these strong westerlies being forecasted in the near future. So that generally gives us an idea. Really, especially as we get towards latter month next month, especially, I guess this is more towards after the second half of mid-month next month, there's really nothing forecast. So I guess there's a lot of uncertainty with what could happen. But in general, the point I'm getting at is that you don't see any significant westerly wind bursts being forecast, which would mean that there isn't anything that overwhelmingly suggests that, at least atmospherically, we're really rapidly changing and headed towards an El Nino. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. And obviously that is very important because especially this graph goes out all the way till April 29th. So pretty much the end of next month. And you don't see anything significant that suggests that we'll have a strong westerly wind burst, which would mean that we are definitely beginning to change and head towards an El Nino, because by April 29th, we're already at the end of next month, heading into the month of May, and we'll only be a month away from hurricane season then. And if we don't have, I can tell you for sure, if we're not already significantly on our way towards an El Nino by the time we start hurricane season, any El Nino that does develop will probably not be significant to impact the hurricane season anyway, which is obviously a plus in terms of the season being active. But at least if we were to kind of extend this out over the next several months, this is a CFS forecast for the Nino 3.4. I'm kind of looking at this wary and kind of like a little bit wary because there seems to be a lot of disagreement and uncertainty with the models right now. We're still in the month of March. We're just getting into the month of April, so we're still kind of within that spring predictability barrier uncertainty. So pretty much meaning the climate models right now and things, at least for hurricane season, still looks very fuzzy. We're just getting into the month of April. We're just getting into when things start to become more certain. So we'll probably get a better idea over the next several weeks. But at least for right now, I guess the CFS would be a lot more of a case of if maybe this map does actually start to show a lot more of these oranges and yellows further out as we head into next month. Because as you can see, at least from where we are now, which is roughly in March, from then, we kind of see a little bit of a dip going into April, but then as we start heading in towards the summer months, especially as we get towards July, and especially as we get towards the end of the year, at least if you're looking at the forecast from the CFSV2, we kind of go from where we are now, which is right around neutral, to maybe slightly colder than neutral, and we end up going pretty steadily towards El Nino. And pretty much all of the ensembles kind of slowly warm up. Although you kind of see quite a huge spread. We kind of have some of these that go way off the charts, go as high as, super strong El Nino territory, to a lot of them which kind of cluster around neutral to maybe weak El Nino. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, but the CFS is, I guess, one of the warmer sides. On the warmer side, they generally take this, or they generally expect an El Nino, especially as we head towards the end of the year. But I do want to focus you at least on the July to October period, because this is generally where the peak of the hurricane season is, and I mean, that's why I'm pointing out why this is very significant, because this is generally where the peak of the hurricane season is, and we're warm, and we're getting warmer, but we're not all the way, let's say, over here with the CFS forecast. We're warm, but we're still generally um we're on the warmer side of neutral. So we don't have an overwhelmingly strong El Nino as we head into the peak of hurricane season. So that would also not be necessarily bad in terms of it being a suppressive factor towards the Atlantic. We don't have an overwhelmingly strong El Nino, and especially if the Atlantic remains warm and gets warmer again over the next several weeks, as I think it probably would, maybe any sort of warmth that we do have would kind of be counteracted, I would assume, if we have a warm neutral headed towards an El Nino. The bottom line I'm trying to get at is that, yes, we are warming up with the CFS, but we're not, let's say, in strong El Nino territory by the time we get to around July to October. That would almost guarantee that the season would be completely shut down. We're still on the neutral side of things, and generally, whether it's warm or cold, when we're generally in ENSO neutral, things tend to get a little fuzzy. So want to point that out. I think it's very important to bring that up. And we'll watch this very closely over the next several weeks. We'll see how things progress, especially with the CFS. As we head into April, this will probably change a lot. I mean, at least this map specifically updates every day. So this is really changing a lot anyways. But we'll be watching this as well as with all the other climate model data that we'll probably get very soon, especially as we are now beginning to head into the month of April. Lots of things, at least ENSO-wise and tropics-wise, to pay attention to over the next several weeks, and we'll definitely be monitoring them very, very closely. But I do want to bring you to weather we have at least today, because lots of weather to talk about today and lots of weather to talk about over the next several days, at least in terms of United States weather, what's going on right now. And this is just generally a temperature map of how temperatures are in the U.S. today. And you can see lots of warmth. In fact, it stretches very far to the north, places as far north as Chicago, Detroit, even as far north as the Mid-Atlantic and parts of the Northeast, including New York City, is 70, mid to upper 70s, even 80s. In fact, this is my latest map, because I live in New York City, and right now they're indicating 80 degrees. So officially, I guess it hit 80 degrees, or it is currently 80 degrees in New York City. Bottom line, it is very, very warm, and especially across the South, it is warm as well. Even Washington, D.C., very warm, and even down into southern Texas, they have temperatures in the lower to mid 80s. And this is very important because we have a lot of warm weather um, occurring right now. There's going to be a lot of humidity. There's a lot of warmth and humidity in place across the eastern half and the south, especially. And that will lead to, yes, you guessed it, severe weather. We're talking about severe weather, and maybe pretty substantial severe weather over the next several days. Let's start off, though, today at least. We do have a slight risk in effect for portions of Texas and some of the Midwest, but not today is what I'm focused on. This is the Storm Prediction Center Day 2 forecast for tomorrow. And yes, you could see lots of warmth that we have in place right now. Temperatures extending all the way up into the 70s, all the way up into the northern Midwest. That's definitely going to translate into severe weather that'll extend all the way up into the northern Midwest. In fact, tomorrow we have this huge enhanced risk area, extends all the way from northeastern Texas all the way up into portions of the Midwest, including Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and even kind of small slithers of far southern Michigan. So a very wide area of an enhanced risk. You would definitely imagine with the enhanced risk this big, they'll probably add a moderate risk maybe soon. But widespread severe weather, this is for tomorrow. There's also widespread tornado risk. We have up to a 10% chance with the hatched area, meaning a chance for potentially significant tornadoes. There's also maxed out, not maxed out, but a significant chance hatched for wind and hail as well. So overall tomorrow, looking at significant severe weather, extends into Monday as well, the Day 3 forecast. Once again, all the way from the Gulf Coast, from the south, from Louisiana, from the Gulf Coast, all the way up into the Northeast, into southern New York. In fact, Philadelphia is in a slight risk, and we even have a marginal risk extending into the Mid-Atlantic coast, including maybe, I guess if you were to look at that, that includes a little bit of New York City. But overall, the bottom line I'm trying to get at, lots of severe weather and very large swath of severe weather as we head into the end of the weekend tomorrow and into Monday. And the severe weather continues as well into next week. We have a 15% chance. We have a heightened risk Day 4 in the Midwest, although that is, relatively small compared to what we have coming on tomorrow and Monday. But then as we head towards Day 5, look at that. We're already into, what is this? Wednesday of next week. So starting from tomorrow, extending into the middle of next week, lots of severe weather to talk about across the South and into the Midwest. And this is Day 5 on Wednesday. We have a 30% chance highlighted over portions of the Tennessee Valley or the Mississippi River Valley into Tennessee, and once again into the Midwest. And usually when you have as high as a 30% chance in the day 4 to 8 range, you would assume that maybe once we get within the day 3 or 2 range, they would maybe add a moderate risk. So bottom line, what I'm hinting at is we have quite the significant severe weather on the way. Not too surprising though, because we're in March and we're about to head into April, and typically around this time anyways is when things really start to ramp up with severe weather. So let's take a look at it on the GFS. The latest 12Z run, which I think just finished loading not long ago, so kind of hot off the press-ish. But let's take it out over the next several days. We have a storm system that is developing over portions of the northern Midwest, a low pressure over Iowa, 999 millibars, kind of wintry weather for portions of the Great Lakes regions, extending all the way from Minnesota into portions of the interior Northeast and New England. I guess that's sleet and, freezing rain, and then maybe some snow depending on where you are. And then this low pressure strengthens as it moves into the Great Lakes. And then we generally have rain and severe weather across the South. And then you could especially see heading into late Sunday into early Monday. Quite a potent line that develops and moves across the south, and then generally moves eastward and then brings rain once again. This system extends all the way from the northeast down to the southern Gulf Coast. Quite an expansive region for severe weather, and that lasts into Monday and then into Tuesday. And then you have another sort of low pressure system that develops over the plains. Quite a strong low pressure, that's 982 millibars. And then you also have quite a bit of active weather across the central western half of the United States too. Look at that, heavy rain and maybe snow for the mountains in northwestern California. And then you have, once again, a strong low pressure that develops over the northern plains heading into Wednesday. Heavy snow for the northern plains. If you're especially in the Dakotas and maybe, once again, the northern Midwest into the Great Lakes. Look at that, quite a significant winter storm there. And then on the southern side, once again, look at that. Lots of heavy rain, and at least for the GFS, because this is not the radar version of the model. There is actually a radar version of the model, but at least in terms of the dynamical model version, that's quite a potent look for severe weather. And in just judging by all these oranges and reds, that generally represents there's a lot of precipitation being forecast. And obviously you would think that's severe weather related. But that might also translate to lots of flooding rain and potential flash flooding, heavy rain. You get the picture. All kinds of threatening severe weather, which is obviously a nuisance. And as we talk about, heavy rain and flash flooding and that kind of thing is not a threat to write off, especially because that tends to be the biggest threat in tropical cyclones. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the dreary weather lasts seemingly from midweek. So this is Wednesday. This is Wednesday, 980 millibars, very strong system over the northern Midwest. And this dreary weather lasts all the way into the weekend, where we have another system that kind of develops, lasts all the way into the weekend, before it kind of clears out, heading into early the following week, which would be the first full week of April. So the week of April 7th, that's when things begin to clear out. So a very active week of severe weather incoming. And just to close out, once again, to kind of further the point of potential flash flooding, this is the next 7 days when it comes to the expected total rainfall by the Weather Prediction Center. And yeah, this is definitely something to keep in mind. We obviously are expecting quite a bit when it comes to severe weather. We have a enhanced risk for day 5 on the Storm Prediction Center map, which is obviously very significant. But this is the next 7 days, especially over the Mississippi River Valley, the central Mississippi River Valley, extending into portions of the eastern Midwest. The Weather Prediction Center, some of these areas highlighted as high as maybe 5 to 7, maybe as much as even 10 inches of rain in some areas. And that definitely is more than enough to cause flash flooding concerns. And we even have a pretty high risk, at least today, in terms of excessive rainfall, because there does seem to be that risk today over portions of Louisiana. So keep in mind, especially when it comes to the rainfall, whenever we think about severe weather, we always think about tornadoes, damaging winds, hail. But when it comes to severe weather, there is also the heavy rain and flooding risk as well that could be a nuisance and could definitely cause a lot of trouble. And it has in the past. As I always mention, the number one risk when it comes to tropical cyclones, the number one risk is flooding. The number one death causer and damage causer is flooding, and at least in terms of tropical cyclones, it's storm surge. But you get the idea. It's water. It's not the wind. And that definitely applies as well to non-tropical systems. So keep that in mind. Flooding, and all kinds of severe weather upcoming this week, and we'll probably have more to talk about when it comes to severe weather over the next several days. We'll probably be posting more videos as well this upcoming week, which if you want to keep on top of those videos, I would really suggest that you like this video, comment your thoughts, and especially subscribe. And if you want to get any further videos the moment I post them, make sure to turn on that notification bell. Just have to repeat it because it is very important. And I generally encourage you as well to subscribe and share this channel and family. Well, share this channel and video with family and friends, especially to those that you might find interested. Always good to kind of spread the word and, grow the community. So would really appreciate if you do that as well. And also if you have any friends or family in any areas of severe weather and you want to show at least the severe weather aspect of this video, you could send that their way as well and keep them informed on any potential severe weather that may be coming their way. Which with that we'll also be doing more videos on, probably within the next several days. That's going to wrap it up for today, though. Although, as I said, we're probably going to be talking a lot more when it comes to severe weather over the next several days. So, definitely going to see me very soon. Until then, stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And as I said, we will probably talk again very, very soon.